Well, I'd like to thank all of the panellists, and just in wrapping up and opening it to questions, I think what we're talking about here are funds of relatively small scale when we look at the financial markets, as new intermediaries as well, sitting between the supply and those who want to invest in things that have a social purpose, and those who are seeking finance to do more of the work they do for social purpose. You've heard that there's still a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of challenges ahead for these funds. And to refer you now to the answers that are kind of at the back of the book, there is a report on the first year's progress of CEDAF, which is also on the department's website. But what we also hear is a story where there's been conversations with hundreds of enterprises about how they're going to finance their business that weren't happening before. There are conversations about grant making versus borrowing money, about what it actually means to have a robust operating model that's sustainable, and connections and networks being formed where people are talking to one another about doing things that benefit society and how we fund and finance that in a way that they weren't doing a few years ago in the same way. There will be many points to look back again and see what progress has been made again from this point. But right now I'd like to open it up to the floor for questions for our panellists, or if you've got questions for me, that's fantastic as well. Questions? And do forgive me that the lights are very bright up here. There's one at the back of the room there.
Hi, Lisa Wade. I've got a Bendigo Bank hat on today. There seems to be a common theme of lack of pipeline. Do you see a role, how do you see all of us collaborating to develop a pipeline in Australia? I'd like all of your opinion on what needs to be done and how we can actually start to develop a pipeline.
Yep, that's a great question, and there are many others in the room who can contribute from their own work and experience on that as well, but I might ask each of the panellists to give just a really brief response to that.
Stand up. I think there's a lot of pipeline out there to go in pursuit of. I mean, the numbers between us, if you add them all up in terms of inquiries, we've probably had a similar number, about 460 inquiries over the 2 years, all of which are not investable, but it doesn't mean they won't be in the future. I think a day like today also demonstrates that there's a very vibrant market of budding and or well-developed social enterprises out there ready to grow. And one of the things I've started to contemplate more and more is that perhaps some of the challenge lies in the intermediary. So, we ought to ask questions about is there pipeline, but we also ought to ask questions of ourselves about our capacity to reach out and build connections with the social enterprises that are out there and consider our own role in doing that well.
As I mentioned when I was talking, that the two primary issues I've seen in terms of the lack of investment readiness have been initially around lack of business planning and strategy, and the other is around more of a grant culture. So in terms of the lack of investment readiness and lack of business planning, I think that's something that can be addressed, again, by forums like this, because with each person actually having to pitch for an investment, it changes their mindset around what is their business plan, how will they make revenue, how can they sell that to someone else? Because if you want someone to give you money, you have to tell them what's in it for them, as opposed to, I'm doing something good for the world, you should give me money, which I think has been the mindset in the grant culture. So if there's a little bit more time spent around capacity building and business planning, and that's something that can happen within the industry to build the capacity of the social enterprises. And I think also it's forums like this that can help with changing the culture, and we've been doing a little bit of that through talking about the case studies and the social enterprises that we've lent money to, and trying to emphasise the social change that's brought about by having long-term investment. So if you go out there and you borrow money, you've got money for 5 to 10 years, which allows social enterprises just to focus on their social mission and not be going back constantly applying next year for another grant and another grant and another grant. So I think just telling those stories will help change the culture and build the capacity of the industry as well.
And to your question about what others that are working across different sectors can do, I think that there's a range of ways that some of the incubation spaces that are emerging can be supported both financially and also through skills and expertise. And there is a conversation that can be had about pipelines so that we're better matching the type of investment people are looking for to the type of finance that's available. So it might be with your Bendigo hat on that people who are coming to Bendigo or Community Sector Bank aren't quite ready for bank financing but could be referred to the funds. And there are other organisations that can play in that as well. I also think that we can do more in Australia of some of the things that can seem a bit cheesy but actually serve a real purpose, like business planning competitions and things that help show people what good business plans look like and showcase what some of the better and more aspirational ideas look like when they're translated into a robust operating model. There are some more questions.
I think I've got a mic here.
Sorry, Steve.
In this room just before, Gordon spoke and he talked about a financial services inquiry potentially happening in this country under the new government. Is there any legislative or other change that either you or other proponents think could assist? So we've talked about there's lessons, it's taking longer than we think. Are there other things that the government could potentially do to assist and speed things up that haven't already been tried?
I think there's a range of things. As a good public servant, I can't really comment on the things that I would like to see the government do. But if you ask me on Thursday, I'd be happy to answer your question. I think there's a range of things that were canvassed before the Senate Economics References Committee. I think there is a role for government in working in a catalytic way, and we can look to places like some of the initiatives in the UK. There are examples like the Contract and Investment Readiness Funds there, like the Social Incubator Fund, and not just the actual money that's being put in, but the governance that's being put around them in order to help develop that pipeline and get enterprises investment ready. Intermediation is a big issue, and that ranges from just having more actors in the market, stimulating that both through different kinds of initiatives. I say to my team, it's a bit like social media. If you've poked the market over here, you want to poke it over here and see if you can get some more activity going, a bit more diversity and different players acting. My personal view is there is a role for government in that. We do need to make sure that in stimulating that we're not creating a different form of dependency, though. It has to be designed to be catalytic so that you're not just creating one form of dependency for another, if it's going to be a market. Otherwise, we have to say, well, actually, there's not a market there if you were still doing the same things, in 10 years' time or whatever. There's certainly a big discussion around regulation in areas like fiduciary duty, for example, other duties that are quite rightly imposed on investors in order to make sure they make good and prudent decisions about investment, hampering the range of decision making or creating cultures and practice that are too risk averse. Some countries have been looking at either providing clarification, so not a change of law, but saying when we said you can only invest for these kinds of purposes, what we really meant was you can also invest for things that are good for society as long as overall across your portfolio you're getting the right kind of returns. And then in other jurisdictions there has been regulation actually mandating either disclosures of the kind of investments that are being made or requiring particularly institutional investors to make different kinds of investors, or allowing or making it clearer, like in the US where there's regulation for mission-related investment for foundations, where those foundations can be confident that they can invest their corpus, even sometimes if it's a below market rate, and still be meeting their duties as fiduciaries of those philanthropic trusts. There are a range of initiatives in terms of the international policy landscape. And what's helpful, I think, is some work that I've done with my team is when you shake it down across the different parts of the market and across the different ways that government can act, like mandating things or enabling things, the types of actions actually shake down to a pretty tight matrix. How it plays out in individual jurisdictions based on what's happening there already and what your regulatory environment looks like is a bit different. But I think that's helpful in terms of getting some of the government conversation going. Other questions? Sorry.
Each of you mentioned bank funding as sort of a constraint, as a ceiling or a floor or whatever, where you felt there was a lot of overlap. Is that you're both competing for the same deals and somebody called you up and said, hey, banks funded me, I'm out? Or was it an internal assessment that said that you should go to see the bank? And is there that much crossover and that much constraint that the banks are reaching down or reaching out? Or how would you characterize it? Could you add some color to the overlap and how you see it complementing or competing?
Yeah, I think there is overlap between us. I think we're at least aware between us that we do receive phone calls from the same enterprises. It's fair to say they're shopping around, but that's fine. I think there's also enough difference, for example, that SVA's fund does equity, we don't. We've probably focused a bit more on early stage unsecured lending than CEFA has. CEFA has scope perhaps in its size that we don't have. So there is, a bit of differentiation. In terms of the banks, I think for those social enterprises that are large and growing and are sitting inside perhaps a very well-established non-profit or some other larger organisation, they're the deals we'd likely lose. But I think it goes to David's point about, and Emily's as well, that we need to be really focused on filling that gap between what's absolutely not doable and what a bank could do. I don't know though, if we saw a good bank deal come along and the enterprise said, we really want to work with you, we wouldn't go referring it elsewhere, I don't think.
Yeah. I think that's true. And just to give you an idea of some of the things that come to us, which we would leave to a bank, as Belinda was saying, the social enterprises do shop around, and we've had some come to us saying, the bank offered me a 5% loan secured over my property, can you match it? We said, well, no, because we don't really do, low risk secured property lending. That's the kind of stuff the bank should do. We're trying to help those social enterprises that don't have access to a property or want to do 100% loan to value or completely unsecured. So if social enterprises can get 5% from a bank, then that's great, that they should go and get that. But we're not trying to target those really low risk, well secured social enterprises.
Yep. Yeah, thanks. So, similar. So it's all the time, we've just got to be aware of it. And then there's also the organisation that's related in some way to another organisation rather than just being inside it, and then sort of built a bank relationship. So we are competing, and banks overlap in different areas, and sometimes banks can't. Often it's to do with loan to valuation ratio. So we're happy. I think it was mentioned about when CEFA is not only looking for secured things, but certainly we'll go to a much higher ratio. So most of the deals we've done are all up around 100, sometimes 110% of LVR. The banks are not there. So that's the other difference. Whereas they will be there at 40 or 50%. So in that sense, that people go to the bank and say, we got this, and it's said, well, where are you going to get the rest of the money? Oh, that's my problem.
That's all we've got time for. So can we thank the panellists and Rosemary for chairing that?